Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Google Cloud Next 23 DEI Keynote focused on targeted universalism, which is really DEI 2.0. I'm Melonie Parker. I'm Google's Chief Diversity Officer, and I am so excited to be here with you today. I'm here with two incredible people that I'm going to introduce. First, John A. Powell is a law professor, director of the UC Berkeley Othering and Belonging Institute. John comes from an incredible background of championing DEI prior to Berkeley, including his time as the National Legal Director for ACLU, the founder and director of the Institute on Race and Poverty and at the University of Minnesota. And John also served as the executive director of the Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity at Ohio State University. Additionally, I'm joined by Juan Rajlin, who is Google's Alphabet and VP and Treasurer. Juan and I have partnered together on a number of projects to advance DEI. He spearheads many of Google's efforts to create economic opportunity for communities in truly an equitable way through impact investments. And outside of his very busy role as the treasurer of Google, Juan also represents Google on the corporate boards of Unidos US, which is the largest Latino civil rights organization in the United States, as well as co-leading DEI for our Google finance function. And then Juan also co-heads our Pride at Google Employee Resource Group, which supports our LGBTQ+ community. And so today's discussion is really going to be a powerful one. We're going to dive into many aspects of DEI with a particular focus on belonging, on creating impact, and we're going to talk about what does the future of diversity, equity, and inclusion look like, and how can all of you help move the needle towards what we're calling DEI 2.0 in both your professional but your personal lives as well. So we're going to get this conversation started, but before we really dive into the heart of the conversation, I thought it would be really important just to share a little bit about myself. For those of you that are visually impaired, I am a Black woman. I have on a blush-colored dress. I have shoulder-length, dark brown hair. In addition to that, though, I am a mom, I'm a daughter, I'm a brand new Gigi to my granddaughter, Noelle. I'm a knitter, I'm a quilter. And so that's just a little bit about who I am. And so John and Juan, I'm going to turn it to you to share a little bit about who you are.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here. I'll share a little bit about myself. As Melody said, I teach over at UC Berkeley and run the Institute. I also have 3 children. And for those who can't see me sitting down, I'm tall, a little over 6 feet, about 6'3", African American. I use mainly he, him pronouns. I used to be a world-class runner. You wouldn't know it if you saw me walking across the stage today, but it's true. It was just a long, long time ago, and it's really a delight to be here.
All right. I'm delighted to be here with all of you. So I'm a gay man, so I use the pronouns he, him. Originally from Argentina, came to this country 25 years ago for school, and so I'm an immigrant as well, and a member of our Latino community in the US. And I'm also a dad of a beautiful 6-year-old daughter.
Thank you, thank you. Well, I thought we'd start by hearing a little bit about how did each of you really get into the important work that we do in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in talking about that, if you could talk about, like, what have you seen around the evolution of DEI itself as you began your involvement in the space? And so, John, we can start with you.
You know, it's interesting to think about the evolution of DEI. I was just at an event with Melody a few weeks ago, and they sort of mapped out how, you know, in the 70s and 80s, we talked about tolerance and involvement. No one uses that phrase anymore. We moved beyond tolerance. And then we talked about diversity. And at some point, someone said, diversity by itself is not enough. We need inclusion, and we need equity. So I think it's a natural evolution. And for myself, I've been part of virtually all those evolutions, going back to high school. And I say to people oftentimes, the sort of evolution from inclusion, tolerance, to belonging, to me is sort of a natural evolution. And I'm 6 of 9 children. I watched my siblings be tracked away from college prep, tracked into certain things. I was growing up in Detroit, so tracked into the automobile industry. And I knew it was wrong. And as I grew, I found it was not just my family, it was happening to people all over the world. Finally, I'll say when I came here to Berkeley 11 years ago to start this institute, there was 7 clusters, one on race, one on gender, one on sexual orientation, one on economics, one on religion. And I felt like they were all sort of dealing with something but waving at each other. They didn't see the deep underlying common structure that they all were fighting, that they all were engaging. And to me, that deep underlying structure was a structure of being othered. And the solution to othering, as I say, is not saming, but belonging. So to me, that sort of evolution was a natural one, and I think it goes back to, in some ways, when I was in high school.
Thank you. I mean, it also talks about pattern recognition and the patterns that you were able to see and recognize and how those have evolved as well, which is really important.
Yeah.
Juan?
So for me, I would say my work with DEI started 10 years ago when I joined the board of an organization, it's a nonprofit called the Posse Foundation, which Melonie, you are a fellow board member of. And it's an organization focused on giving broader access to kids to go to college. So we send kids in groups of 10 in posses to 60 of the top 100 schools in the US. And the notion is that the kids that with full scholarships, and the kids that Posse sends to schools are typically overlooked by the traditional admissions process. Most are first generation, 80% are diverse, coming from diverse communities. And the idea of this organization started when the founder had a conversation with a college dropout who said to her, I would have never dropped out of college if I had my posse with me. And so that's the notion. And posse scholars graduate at a rate of 90%. By the time they are seniors, 80% of them are leading on campus. They're officers of campus organizations. So you could see how having a support system, having belonging, if you will, when you arrive at a place, if you're first generation, it's kind of a new place for you. You may look different than most of the students on campus. It's very easy to feel othered and to feel like you don't belong, right? Yet if you have a group, if you have a support system, if you have belonging, you could feel comfortable. If you feel comfortable, you can gain confidence. If you gain confidence, you can start to contribute and then thrive, which is what happens to these kids. So I saw firsthand 10 years ago when I joined this organization, it wasn't called belonging 10 years ago, but that's what it was. And you know, the power of combining broader access to opportunity with a system where you can actually have a support system and belong. If you combine those two things, magic really happens. So that's the origin of my interest in, you know, being involved in DEI. So here we are, excited for this conversation today.
Thank you. Me too. And I hope, you know, I know you out in the audience are as well. So there are a few important topics that we're going to cover. And I thought it would be really important to start by reflecting on like what's happened in the recent past few years and the impact that things like COVID, there's the Stop Asian Hate movement, the brutal murder of George Floyd, and there are numerous other events that we could all point to that have changed the landscape of DEI, but also really put it under greater scrutiny. And so, recognize that not everybody experiences everything in the same way. And so even the things that I talked about, we've not all experienced them the same because we're different. We're from different cities, different cultures, different backgrounds, et cetera, which is all really important to acknowledge. But I was thinking, John, if you could tell us about some of the ways you've seen a shift in how people have experienced diversity and inclusion in these moments.
I think that's really important. We're situated differently, and there's stuff going on in the country, in the world, that affects us differently. And how we talk about it, how we think about things matter. So for example, you mentioned COVID. I worked a little bit with the World Health Organization, and as you know, when they first came out with COVID, they talked about social distance, to keep social distance. And I literally wrote them and said, you mean physical distance. We need to have social solidarity. It was too late. The social distances are already out there. And that created this space where people were afraid of each other. And we are radically social animals. Now think about this. All of us were born attached to another human being, not metaphorically, actually.
Yes.
And even though the umbilical cord was cut, the spiritual cord was never cut. And yet we do these practices to say to certain people, you don't belong. And as Juan suggested, when you don't belong, you don't thrive. And so in some ways, when we think about COVID or George Floyd, these are all expressions saying not just you as an individual, but you and people who look like you, or people who worship like you, or people who love like you, they don't belong. Now, what's happening in terms of, I think, a backlash, which is happening, is that as the country becomes and the world becomes more diverse, some people who were used to being in a dominant role are saying, do I belong in this new world? In a sense, the fight around DEI is a fight around who belongs. And what we say, and I'd like to paraphrase the Declaration of Independence. It says, we hold these truths to be self-evident. It's not necessary to prove it. They're self-evident that all men are created equal. Okay, all right, so they screwed up. It should have been all people. That's a powerful statement, even though one of the authors of that was Thomas Jefferson and had 600 slaves. It's still a powerful statement. And what I think we're struggling with today is, can we say it is self-evident that every human being belongs? That every human being belongs. And some people will say, of course. Other people will say, not so fast. I'll end just by thinking about the most important case, anti-civil rights case, you could say, in U.S. history is Dred Scott. And in that case, the Supreme Court, Chief Justice Taney said, black people, free or otherwise, could never be part of the political community of the United States. Never. He was saying they could never belong. So in a sense, that struggle of who is the we, who belongs, who does not belong, is powerful. It happens at Google, it happens at our church, it happens in our neighborhood. And to me, that's the battle that we have to fight, and it's punctuated when we think of things like COVID and George Floyd.
It's powerful. Thank you for sharing that. Juan, I know you spend a lot of time thinking about and helping advance DEI across Google. Like, when you think about impacting change, what sort of shift did you see in how that was approached in response to some of these larger, like, cultural moments? And how do you perceive the importance of leadership from companies like Google?
Yeah, so I think for us, 2020 was a pivotal time, right? We had the pandemic first, and then in the spring, and then the murder of George Floyd in the summer. And we were, of course, sort of called to action as a result of what was going on. And what we wanted to do was, ask ourselves, where can we have an impact given who we are, given our capabilities, our assets? So very quickly, when the pandemic hit, we concluded small businesses were going to be, potentially have a devastating impact. Within small businesses, small businesses for diverse communities were going to be more vulnerable. And small businesses are such an important part of our products, giving our ecosystem. So that was an area that we felt we wanted to lean in. And then the other area is digital skills. So in particular, when you think about jobs, 2/3 of job openings in the US today require some level of digital skills. So you can't think about jobs in this country unless you think about digital skills. So we felt that economic opportunity was a banner under which we could do work on both of these areas, and that's where we focused, and we did it in a way where, in addition to our products, we also wanted to sort of do our part with our balance sheet as well. So overall, we committed since 2020 almost $500 million in programs and investment funds that are designed to support these areas. So what are the kinds of things that we did? We set up a fund to support CDFIs, so Community Development Financial Institutions. It's a $180 million fund. We supported 60 organizations, and then in turn, the CDFIs turn around and support small businesses, particularly in diverse communities. So we helped over 130,000 small businesses. 40% were women-owned small businesses. Over 50% were small businesses owned by diverse communities. So we're proud of that work. We thought CDFIs was the way to reach deeper into communities and sort of fill the gap where banks or other capital providers weren't providing the right capital access. So that's one example. Another example around small business is entrepreneurs. So when you think about entrepreneurs, companies get started by venture capital funding, but only 3% of venture capital funding in the US goes to Black and Latino founders. Yet we're almost 1/3 of the population in the US. So 3% to 1/3. There's a huge gap in terms of how equitable or not capital is distributed when it comes to venture capital. So we invested in funds that are looking to bridge this gap, and we also set up our own Black Founders Fund and Latino Founders Fund where we're directly funding companies. And then the last example I'll mention is around digital skills. 5 years ago, we started a program of Google Career Certificates where without a degree required, you could take between 3 to 6 months online. You could take a course and earn a Google Career Certificate in fields like IT support or data analytics or cybersecurity, not just for jobs in tech, but jobs anywhere where these skills are required and important. And what we found is, in particular for underserved communities, what got in the way for learners to be able to complete this certs was life got in the way. So they needed more support, wraparound support, whether it's job placement support, a living stipend, childcare support. A lot of our learners are parents. Many have more than one job. And so we set up a $100 million fund, which is the biggest ever workforce development fund set up by any company. This is new, so we don't have results to show yet for it, but we're very excited about what it can do in terms of creating more opportunity, more equitably for communities. And we view economic opportunity as core to DEI. When you think about the March on Washington in 1963, yes. It was actually called the Job and Freedom March.
Yes.
So jobs
just celebrated 60 years on Saturday.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So that's the kind of work that we've done.
It's a lot to really be proud of, and setting that intention and the impact that we'll continue to see and realize that you talked about. Like some of these things, we're still watching to see what the full impact is. John, based on what both you and Juan just shared, where do you think DEI can go when you think about the shifts that you've seen in the recent past?
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of turmoil for the next several years. As many of you know, there's a pushback. In some states now, you can't use the word equity. And there's a zero-sum sensibility that if one group does well, another group does poorly. And it's become a political football. And, you know, I think all of us, but certainly large organizations like Google, will play a pivotal role in helping us to potentially navigate this. And I think from our perspective, the work around belonging can help in that regards, because it's not belonging for some. We say, how do you create a world where everyone belongs and no one is other? That most of our efforts around these issues have been seen as zero-sum. So it's really important to do the work that Juan just described, but it's also really important to tell a story, to have a narrative so people can see themselves. That when we say diversity and when we say belonging, we're not saying whites are excluded. And that's the implicit assumption that some people make it explicit. What are you doing for poor whites? And in a sense, I think that's a legitimate question. But doing things for poor whites shouldn't mean you're not doing anything for poor blacks or poor Latinos or poor Asians. It's that everybody should have a place at the table. So I think we have to really sort of refine that and make it clear that when we talk about equity and diversity, and when we talk about inclusion, when we talk about belonging, we really are talking about everybody. But it also has some programmatic teeth behind it. So we're not just talking. As the country becomes more diverse, and frankly, as whites become less of a dominant number, it's going to be hard to sort of figure out, how do we do this and share? How do we do it with everyone around the table? And there will be some people who say, you know what, if we don't have any blacks at this school, that's fine. They won't look at the structures and mechanisms. They won't look at all the things in place that have been keeping people back. So I think that part of the question will be, can we really think of a world where everyone belongs? We have fixed Thomas Jefferson's apparent statement that, no, this is not just about men, this is not just about white people, this is not just about black people, this is about everyone. And I think the role of Google and innovators, in a sense, this will be the most important innovation. The idea of a multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy is really an experiment. Can it really survive? If it doesn't survive, then all the other things we're doing really won't add up. If we don't survive in terms of our core values and institutions. And so we, for one, have been saying we want to create a world where belonging is the global norm. Where belonging is a global norm. Now just think about 75 years ago, the Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. Literally, when that declaration was made, people didn't know what it was about. There were arguments, it doesn't mean anything. People are starving, people need education, people need health care. Why are you talking about a Declaration of Human Rights? And today, we haven't achieved it, but it has meaning, it has a guff, it has a norm. So can we do the same thing with belonging? And if we do that, it will be because people like yourself, organizations like Google, will be taking a leadership role. We'll be entrepreneurs in terms of making a world where we all belong.
That gives me so much hope. I don't know about all of you, but certainly inspirational and aspirational to lean into that. You know, in recent years, belonging has become of greater importance and focus of the work we do at Google. Thank you so much for your partnership. And it's become increasingly so at other companies, where we're seeing some companies replacing belonging or replacing inclusion with belonging in the DEI equation. And at Google, you know, belonging isn't just about making sure that people are included, but it's ensuring that they really belong, that they actually feel that they belong, and that's what they're experiencing. And I'd love to hear from both of you about, like, how do you think about belonging? And you started to share that a little bit, John, but if you could go a little bit deeper, and then Juan, let's start with you and then go to John.
Yeah, so just to reflect a little bit on Google, so I've been at Google for 5 years. And at Google, one of the core sort of principles that we have is psychological safety with teams. So this is kind of a long-standing concept, but I think we did research a while back around how do teams perform and what teams were most innovative or most productive, and trying to determine what were the characteristics that were common in those teams that were most innovative. And the one thing that kept coming up again and again and again was psychological safety. So in other words, the team members felt that their team had their back, that they could make mistakes, and those mistakes weren't going to be held against them, that it was okay to take risks, and there was a sense where you were safe. So first things first, like psych safety for teams. I think that the next thing I think we've learned, especially after 2020 and 2021, when we were literally apart for 2 years, we physically couldn't be together. We also had quite a bit of community, I would say, at Google, without realizing it, with the micro kitchens and like the volleyball courts and all these things we do so that Googlers can spend time together, and we lost that overnight. So having and it was a big challenge for leaders like us, how do we keep that going when we can't be physically together? We also had a lot of people join that never got an opportunity to be in with their teams physically together, and they were onboarding into an organization with a laptop, and that was it. And so they had a very different experience. They didn't quite feel like they belonged. So between psych safety and community, I think that's the combination, at least what we strive for. I'm not saying we're there or perfect, but that's what we try to do. That's how I think about how we create belonging when you have both of those things.
No, I appreciate how you drew that out, and and what both of you touched on. And there's a real need to solve for groups that are situated apart from the majority. And you were talking about that, John, with othering. I think it really helps us to start taking a look at what othering means. And so could you talk a little bit more about othering, and what's the role of othering and belonging?
So, I said earlier about how, again, back in the 80s and 90s, we were talking about tolerance. And now that I'm sure for most of you, at least for me, it's a funny word. Like, who wants to be tolerated, right? In a sense, you're saying these people are so different from us. We can tolerate them, I mean, how many of you, go on a date and someone say, it's a great date. I really can tolerate another date with you. It's like, I don't think so. So othering is basically when you don't see someone else's full humanity, when you don't see someone else's full dignity, when you see someone as lesser than. And it even goes beyond that. Sometimes we see not only as people as lesser than, but we also see them as a threat. And it can be explicit or it can be implicit. When we see another human being, nature thought it would be kind of cool to recognize each other. So when we see another human being, there's this part of the brain that lights up. This at an unconscious level, just saying, hey, fellow species, When we deeply other people, that part of the brain does not light up. Instead, the part that does light up is this part associated with insects, with disease, with disgust. So when we deeply other someone, we actually see them not as a human being, as an unconscious level. So belonging is acknowledging and practicing that we are profoundly interconnected, And belonging takes us beyond inclusion, because inclusion, many of you have, started new jobs, and you're included.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Well, you're a guest. And oftentimes when you start a new job, you're on probation. You're a guest. We're going to see if we like you. We're going to see if you're okay. And if we do, maybe you'll be asked to be part of the team. If not, we'll ask you to leave. You're on probation, not the company or not your boss. And it's like, this is the way we do things here. I compare it to going to someone else's dinner party or someone else's party, and they pick the food, they pick the music, they pick the other guests. You're welcome to come, but you're a guest. And as a guest, you can be asked to leave. So inclusion is more like being a guest. You're joining somebody's thing that you had maybe no hand in making. Give you one concrete example. In the 1970s, when women came into the workplace in large numbers, many of the workplaces had pornographic pictures lining the wall. And the women were saying, oh, and the guy said, this is the way we do things. You know, you're a rookie here. Don't come making problems. We've done like this for 30, 40, 50 years. This is who we are. That case actually went all the way to the Supreme Court. And that's when the idea of a hostile work environment came out. But many of the men, although some of the men objected too, didn't see what was wrong with the environment. This is just the way we do things. So we're inviting women in, but come in and shut up. Inclusion is saying, come in and shut up. Belonging is saying, co-create. You're not joining something that's just there. You're contributing to something that's going to be next. We want every part of you. It doesn't mean you get to make it over all by yourself, but you get to co-create it with others. So the core of belonging is your full participation and your co-creation. And in that sense, it's inclusion 2.0.
That's amazing. When you were talking about that, it made me think about this idea, this notion of bridging. And like, how do you bridge from othering to belonging? What does that look like?
Well, bridging is a very important concept. So there are two concepts that really support belonging. One is bridging, and the other one is called targeted universalism. And bridging, as the name suggests, is basically saying we are different in some important way, even though those differences may be entirely social. That is, there's no inherent difference. I'm probably taller than most of you, and that's irrelevant. We don't organize around, all right, the tall people are going to live on this street, the short people are going to live on that street. We do that around Jews going to live in this neighborhood, non-Jews going to live in this neighborhood. We do that around black people are going to live in this neighborhood, white people are going to live in this. So there's different types of othering. When we other not just at an individual level, but at a group level. When we say that if you want to come to this country and you're from a Muslim country, you can't come. Or when we say in East Africa, if you're gay, you're subject to execution. We're not talking about individuals, we're talking about groups. And so when we put groups at odds, we create a cleavage between them. We're saying this group does not belong, or this group's difference is problematic. So bridging is saying, how do we build the bridge to that other group? And there's a lot of stuff, and there's a lot of stuff on our website. I'm literally writing a book now on bridging. But the beginning of it is to be willing to see the other person as a full human being and hear their story, really listen to their suffering. That word compassion, which the heart of bridging means to suffer with. So it doesn't mean I agree with you. It doesn't even mean necessarily I like you, but am I willing to really listen and see your humanity? And the research on this is actually phenomenal, that when you actually deeply listen, the South African word is sabawanu, which means I see you. Mm-hmm. I see you. Mm-hmm. And we need to be seen. Mm-hmm. And when we see each other, something happens in both directions. So learning to create a space, stories, practices, where we really see each other, that's the heart of bridging. And the power of that is hard to understate. One quick example. Nelson Mandela, when he was in prison, he asked the prison guards to teach him the words of his captors, Afrikaner. In Soweto, the students were protesting because they were having to learn instructions in Afrikaner. It's like, we don't want to learn that language. Nelson Mandela was being imprisoned by the Afrikaners and saying, I want to see your sacred symbols. And so that movie, when he comes out and goes to the rugby match, it's like, I see you. And it's controversial, and most of us aren't Nelson Mandela, but can we actually pause and see each other? Can we actually pause and be curious about each other? Because the other thing, when you other someone, you're not curious about them. They become flat. They become just an old black man, or just a gay man, or just a Latino, or just a woman. And none of us are any of those just. We're multiple beings. And so bridging requires a curiosity and a willingness to really see each other.
You know, John, there's a real need to solve for groups that are situated apart from the majority. And I think, you know, like that's what you're taking us deeper into. And by doing that, it helps us to start taking a look into the future. You know, we're able to use what we've learned, we're able to use data, research, and the common humanity that you talked about to really build this path forward. And so, you know, as we think more about like the future of DEI, something that's really excited me about this framework, and you've really been giving us these concepts along the way, is the framework called targeted universalism, which is that idea of looking at universal goals that are common to humanity versus like a specific group. And so can you dive into
Sure.
this a little bit deeper?
Yes, thanks for the question. So if you think about equity, the way it's practiced in most places, it says there's a favorite group that has a lot or has too much, and there's a marginal group. And the goal is to close the disparity between those groups. So the baseline is what the favorite group has. And the goal then is to close the gap between the groups. And that seems reasonable until you dig into it more deeply. What if what the favorite group has is not all that good?
Yeah.
Think about suicide. The suicide rate between black men and white men have been declining, not because black men are killing themselves less often, but because white men are killing themselves more often. So do we want to, should we be happy if we kill ourselves at the same rate as white men? And so what is the goal? If the goal is not to have what white people have, what is the goal? Also, when you say, let's close the gap, it creates a zero-sum competition. We say, well, let's take from one group and give to the other group. Well, if you're the group that's being taken from, you don't feel good about yourself. And the group who feels like they should have more, they feel like they should have more. So again, this is what we're dealing with right now. So what does targeted universalism do with that? It says the goal is universal. It's not tied to any particular group. We can say all groups should flourish. And then we say, but groups are situated differently. So how do we get groups who are situated differently to that universal goal? It's targeted strategy. The strategies are targeted based on how we're situated. Concrete example, let's say we want to get from the second floor to the third floor. We're going to build an escalator. The goal is clear. We're going to go from floor 2 to floor 3. Here comes someone in a wheelchair. We can now, a simple concept of equality, say, let's treat everybody the same. I'm ambulatory, I get on the escalator, this person has to figure out how to get on the escalator too. Well, this doesn't seem quite right. We could say, we need an elevator for this person. Then some people will say, this person is getting special treatment. Why does she get an elevator? The treatment is not special, the treatment is targeted based on how we are situated. And so targeted universalism says we want to get everybody, including the white men. We want to get everybody to stop killing themselves, every group, including white men, including white women, including black men, including black women, everybody. But we are situated differently. So we're not going to treat everybody the same. We're going to treat people consistent with how they're situated to get them to that universal. So that's targeted universalism. And we also refer to it sometimes as equity 2.0, because we think it's what equity was trying to get to, but it got lost in terms of this fight between what was considered a dominant group and a marginal group.
Mm-hmm. Juan, as you think about this concept and you think about like the larger we and approaching DEI from this lens and this framework, what are some of the ways that you've seen this brought into practice at Google, and what do you think is important about how it's factored over the next 5+ years?
Yeah. So this is very much in line with the work we need to do at Google, because just think about Google. We have 15 products that have over 500 million users each. We have 6 products that have 2 billion users each. So when you think about the universe, that's who we're solving for, right? And our mission is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful, universally. So it's in our mission, actually. And we've been on a journey, I would say, for the last 5 years to embed this thinking of actually thinking about every user, which means you have to think about it differently. Because, like you just explained it so brilliantly. So you actually put in a bottle, like what we try and do with our products to make them useful for everyone. Now, it's a journey. Like I wouldn't say we're perfect at this, but we, products like the skin tone on the Pixel camera, which captures, different skin tones with accuracy, whereas before the camera didn't capture all skin tones with the same accuracy. You can do the math on which skin tones were not properly captured, or having the ability on search or on maps or on shopping to identify communities, create opportunity, like Black-owned businesses or LGBT-friendly and safe businesses and places. Sometimes it's about safety for some of our communities. Or this is my favorite example, it's also a cloud product. On Meet, you now have live captions. So if you have a hearing disability, we could literally level the playing field and you could operate as if you didn't have it, because we have that. It's just the power of our products and the power of technology, and that we collectively in this room, the impact we can have, if we think about this and embed it into how we think about the products from the design stage all the way through. So I view it as a big opportunity, actually, what you just articulated.
Definitely. I mean, this has been such an incredible conversation. I know if I'd been in the audience, I would have been taking feverish notes. And so as we really end our time together, I want to close by asking each of you to share what are some key practices, tips, actions that our audience can take with them back to their businesses, their institutions, their homes, as well as their communities to really help drive towards this idea of DEI 2.0. And Juan, let's start with you.
So I'm going to borrow from my Google colleagues, given that this is an audience of mostly engineers, and thinking about what we just talked about thinking about everyone for when you build your products. And this is Anne Baptiste, who leads our product inclusion work at Google. She loves to say, if you don't intentionally include, you will unintentionally exclude. Meaning, you may have the best intentions and think that you are building for everyone, but unless you start at the very beginning and have the different points of view and voices at the very beginning of the design process, you're actually excluding. You're actually othering, like what John said. And so that's one takeaway for engineers in particular, as you build products, to be intentional about including.
Thank you. John, what's something you'd like to leave the audience with?
Well, a couple of things very quickly. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal. So why aren't they equal? If we're created equal, why aren't they? One way of reading what the Declaration of Independence, which really is borrowing from Aristotle, is that when you see statistical enduring inequality, it's to suggest probably that something's wrong. If we believe that people are inherently equal, then consistently having women not in the workplace shouldn't be, well, they have to explain, that they deserve to be in the workplace. It's like, maybe there's something going on. if we start with the assumption that everybody's capable, every group, not just individuals, every group, and then tell a story and make sure that many of those people and groups will get data, and then also talk to those groups that are excluded to build a world where everyone but everyone belongs.
Thank you both for sharing those. You know, at Google, we want belonging to be felt everywhere, in our workplace, in our products, in our society, and we want this to be felt by everyone. But we recognize that, you know, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And it means that we're not only trying to solve the problems of today, but we're trying to build a better foundation so that we don't have to keep solving the same problems tomorrow. You know, you can visit belonging.google.com to see the ways that we foster belonging for everyone across these areas. As I said before, I am incredibly hopeful that the work that we've done and will continue to do will spark ideas on how you can impact your businesses, your institutions, your homes, as well as your communities. It's truly been an incredible conversation with so much information for our audience to take with them. I've thoroughly enjoyed speaking with both of you, and I want to thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thanks to all of you who have joined us here today. Please be sure to check out this session on the next website after the event. We're going to post a recording of this session. We're going to include some downloadable resources for you to use on your own journey going forward. Thanks for being here. Enjoy the rest of your time at Next.